People talk about it, but what exactly is a luxury vehicle tax and what is tax compliance, amongst others? We have been joined by a fiscal policy specialist with Oxfam in the person of Dr. Alex Ampabing. Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast Daily.
Morning.
It's always good to have you, and welcome back to Ghana.
Yeah.
Now, on issue of tax compliance, what is tax compliance?
I think in a very simple term, tax compliance is taxpayers honoring their tax obligations. So taxpayers doing what the tax law expects them to do, and whether it's by enforced compliance or by voluntary compliance.
Interesting. So beyond tax compliance, you mentioned forced compliance or enforced compliance and voluntary compliance. What's the difference between enforced compliance and voluntary?
Okay, the enforced compliance is that aspect of the compliance where the tax authority kind of resort to, I would say, pressures, which include auditing probabilities, fines and penalties, literally be more on the taxpayer's tail to get them to comply.
That's more of an aggressive stance.
I'll put it that way, yes.
Wow.
So with that one, the tax authority kind of have a very strong stance in pushing the tax compliance agenda. It's actually on your tail for you to comply. Whereas the voluntary compliance, as the name goes, is voluntary. So the taxpayer pays willingly without being forced. The taxpayer look at the reason, the rationale behind it, and then get up to pay. So rather than sitting down to be audited and forced to go and pay, you just willingly go to the relevant place and make the payment.
So which one would you think is more preferable or more suitable for Ghana? The enforced or the voluntary? And which one is actually practiced in Ghana, largely?
I think that you can't say one is practiced in a particular jurisdiction and it's not. They go hand in hand because you're not going to have honest taxpayers across the board. There are times when you have some particular taxpayers who willingly go ahead and pay based on their tax morale because they believe it's the right thing to do, or because they look at the benefits of paying the taxes. For example, the security they enjoy, the roads, the hospitals, the schools. They look at some of this and think, I think morally is the right thing to do.
Wow.
Whereas there are those who they see all those benefits, but for some reason they have to be pushed. There are some, you call them the capitulative compliers. They want to pay.
The who complies?
Capitulative. So they want to pay, but you have to kind of push them to the limit. If you push them, they will pay. And there are those who will do anything possible to evade the taxes. So there are a variety of tax compliers or taxpayers. So in terms of Ghana, I think they use both, just like any other tax jurisdiction.
Okay.
GRA uses...
So we do a bit of enforcement, or we use a bit of, the enforced tax compliance means as well.
But I would say majority of the approaches we use in Ghana are towards enforcement. Most of the conversation from the GRA, if you follow the messages they put across, most geared towards the enforced compliance. Whereas we want to see, can we support the taxpayers? Because not necessarily everybody is a criminal. It's not like everybody don't want to pay. There are people who genuinely want to pay. Perhaps they don't understand the tax laws. And I remember recently, about 2 years ago, I did a study on the Ghana informal sector to understand why do they pay tax. Not why they don't pay. I want to know why do they pay tax in the first place, because those guys have so many opportunities to avoid taxes, yet they pay. So my motive was, I want to see why informal sector taxpayers pay taxes.
And what's your conclusion?
And the conclusion was that most of them have a huge tax morale. In other words, most of them believe payment of tax is the right thing to do. But there are other factors which will shape the morality element. Having the strong morale alone is not enough. There are those who think, I want to pay tax, but is the system right? Do I understand it in the first place? There are so much complexities in the tax laws. Sometimes, I think last week or the week before, I was making this statement here, like if you go to the GRA website, for example, most of the information there are so complex, and it's very difficult for a taxpayer, ordinary taxpayer who is not a tax expert or not a lawyer, to be able to digest the content of those
you know, even with lawyers, it's a bit difficult to break all those things down. That's one thing I must say. Regular law students, maybe doing LLB, would find tax law or Ghana laws on tax one of the most difficult subjects. So I'm even wondering how a regular person might, who hasn't really sat in a classroom to study taxation or tax law, how they'll be able to appreciate this. So for a person like that, I'm feeling maybe the best thing that will move the person to actually pay taxes is either fear of punishment or
100%.
When the person is convinced that my money is being put to good use.
Yeah, and I think that really answers why I said mostly the approach adopted by Ghana is predominantly on the enforced compliance. And the problem with the enforced compliance approach is that you end up spending more money.
Wow.
Because it's hugely expensive. You constantly have to send GRA staff to go around monitoring if people are paying. You constantly want to have people on the watch. It costs you more to deploy. And
you need more staff because you're close to 30 million Ghanaians.
Yep. You need more stuff, and as you see their cars passing most of the time, going around closing shops, and I'm not saying it's bad, it is good, because definitely there are those who will want to evade no matter what.
But from what you're saying, it's even self-defeating, because if your aim is to collect revenue and you are spending a lot to collect the revenue, then you are making little for the state.
And that was the point I raised, I think, on our first session when we were talking about the core principles of a very good tax. Economy was one. You don't want to spend substantial amount in the tax collection because that diffuses the purpose. So what we want to do is to have measures in place that will increase the voluntary compliance level, whilst you keep the stick, because you have the carrot and the sticks. So once you keep the stick and deploy as and when, but then make sure most of your approaches are very supportive. There's intensive tax education, which I think tax knowledge generally is very poor. And I remember going around asking people why they pay taxes. And one of them just said, sometime I'm here and GRA people will just come and say, this is how much you have to pay. So to me, if I'm a tax person, leading GRA team, going to that person, I'll be very worried.
But how are we even sure of the amount of taxes being collected? Because barely yesterday, this is not GRA, this is AMA, somewhere in Accra Central. The AMA official told me that if I park this way, on the same space, so if I park facing the wall, it's 10 cedis. If I park on the side, if I park facing the side, it's 5 cedis. It made no sense at all to me. So when a GRA official comes to you that this is how much tax you're owing, how are you even certain that this is the amount of tax you're supposed to pay and he's not overcharging you?
And that's also another project we did also on this type of tax normally which covers the informal sector is what we call the presumptive taxes. Because within the informal sector, we don't have they're not paying taxes based on profit. So the amount of tax they pay is on presumption. They presume that this is how much your business is worth, this is how much profit you're making. So on that basis, this is how much tax you pay.
So it's entirely subjective, more or less.
But there's nothing wrong with that. It's used across all the world, both developed and developing countries, even across Europe. Presumptive tax will never die. But what is missing in Ghana, in France, for example, they call it forfait. And the French people might forgive me, forfait system. In Israel, they call it the takshiv. So it's all across the world, it's there. But what is different from other countries compared to Ghana is that when you go to the France system, they have a clearly defined indices on how your presumptive tax is determined. And you are able to challenge it. So, for example, if you're a restaurant, they look at the size of your restaurant, which I know Ghana does it, but not in the detail that allow the taxpayer to challenge it. So they look at the size, the square meters, the number of staff you have, the location. Sometimes they look at the electricity consumption, because from third-party data, they're able to infer And if you're
So
consuming,
even though in developed countries it's subjective, there's a calculation to it, which makes it comparatively more objective than we find here in Ghana.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ghana, they do have it. I'm not saying, and I don't want GRA to misquote me, say, Alex, that they do have it. They have the one on the kiosk. They look at the size of the size of the kiosk. Normally, sometimes it doesn't even matter. Sometimes you go to a big kiosk. What is the quantity of goods in? What is the items?
Yeah.
Somebody is selling items worth, say, car parts worth millions of Ghana cedi. Somebody will have the same size of shop.
Maybe selling Gary.
Selling Gary. So we need a proper distinction. I know they do that ABC categorization, but we need to simplify it, intensify the education to make sure taxpayers really understand what they're paying. Because one of the problems...
While you're on that trajectory, I want you to continue on maybe the role of GRA before we come straight to the role of taxpayers, because of course we do know that we all should be tax compliant. And from the discussions we've had so far, voluntary is always better than enforced, because enforced will cost a lot more to the states. So voluntary is perfect. So what is GRA supposed to do? You started talking about it, so I want you to continue there. And maybe the taxpayer too, what are you also supposed to do?
From the GRA's perspective, you know, tax payment is between the taxpayer and the tax authority. It's a contract. Even though you don't have any written document, but it's a psychological contract. Where the taxpayers expect, by giving you the money, I expect services to be provided. I expect fairness in the system. I expect you to do what is right and support me to pay. So GRA also expect the taxpayers to pay. Fine. If the taxpayers keep paying, and the GRA, or here the government, I will use the government because the GRA is not the one who is going to spend the money.
Of course.
So if taxpayers keep paying, what they expect is the government doing their side of the bargain. If the government refuses to do their side of the bargain, they think the contract has been broken in a way, and that gives them the legitimate reason not to pay. Because if I expect you to give me...
So things like corruption would affect maybe a taxpayer's voluntariness to pay.
Yeah. So in terms of the expectation from GRA and looking at that psychological contract, which is already agreed, what the taxpayer expects, one, how simple is the tax system? Does the taxpayer understand it, or you just come and impose on them? Understanding of the tax system is one. Judicious use of the revenue collected is very important. People want to see visible signs of paying taxes. If I am operating in Abosiokan and you come there to collect taxes, but then when it rains, it's all muddy everywhere. What is the incentive for me to pay? So I want to see that after collecting the tax, all the roads in Abosiokan has been done, electricity, everything is clearly laid out in the marketplace. So when you come back collecting the tax, you have fulfilled your side of the bargain. So here I will push for revenue earmarking, especially the informal sectors or the markets. If by revenue earmarking, what I mean is that if you collect 100 Ghana from a particular area, make sure you leave at least 10, 20 Ghana to develop that particular area. Let the people feel it, let them see it. When you come to collect, they will not say no. So the psychological contract cut across the issue of corruption has to be well tackled. I remember part of the study, one person telling me, I have somebody who is a tax collector and he has 2 receipts. Sometimes he goes to a particular market, he issues his receipt. And sometimes you go to another market, he issues GRA's receipt. So there are potential leakages in the system. Can we start tackling them? Making sure that it's robust, properly watertight, that taxpayers have trust in the system, and also get the tax system closer to the people. You don't expect somebody to travel all the way from close their shops in Kaneshi, come to Accra to pay tax of about 50 Ghana. That doesn't make sense.
Of course
so
not.
one thing I will advocate for is about getting the tax closer to the people.
We should make it easy.
And for
maybe
some
start
time,
paying with mobile money amongst others.
For some time, I've been advocating for what I describe as a tax kiosks. And I think it's one thing that will make a huge difference for the informal sector. By tax kiosks, what I mean is if you have, if somebody operates in a market, say, which market?
Adabraka market.
Adabraka market, yes. Can we have a mini GRA office there in the form of a kiosk. So the taxpayers don't have to close their shops and walk all the way to Accra to pay, but they have somebody in there, one who can educate them in case they don't understand the tax system. Again, somebody who can also be a point of contact for the GRA and somebody they can relate to.
Wonderful.
You can constantly keep changing them. So vantage points, can we have those tax skills? I mean, mobile money is trending and doing very well. We can do the same. So rather than employing hundreds of GRA staff
to be going around,
can we bring the tax officers or bring the tax closer to the doorsteps of the people?
This is wonderful. This is sweet. This is sweet. Now, I want us to, we have just about a few minutes to go. So I want us to give viewers a taste of part one of our luxury vehicle tax. Then in a fortnight or so, we'll continue with part two of the luxury vehicle tax. Okay. So let's jump straight to what is luxury vehicle tax?
I would love that, but I think I missed one thing.
Please go on.
And that was with the taxpayers.
The taxpayers,
so far,
their
we've been busting on the GRA and the ministry, but just quick statement and maybe, I think most of times the average Ghanaian believes that after election, there's a pool of money. So we give you the power, money is sitting down there, go and do whatever you want you to do. It doesn't work like that. When we vote, government do not have any money. What is going to happen about me and you now going to pay our taxes, give it to the government in power to implement whatever project made us voted for them. So if we come out from that mindset that there's money, we will keep borrowing as a country all the time. And that's not the solution. We all want that beautiful Ghana beyond aid. I want it. I know you want it. Nobody wants to go begging for money to survive. But Ghana can only go beyond aid when collectively we put together that when we vote, the enthusiasm you use to vote, you should use the same thing to support the government in the form of taxes. So as we're pushing them to be more responsible, to avoid, to deal with corruption, to educate us, in the same way, every citizen should see the tax payment as an obligation, just like we pay our tithes in the churches, and we feel comfortable to go and pay the tithes. Well, because maybe you believe God will do wonderful things to us, the pastor is building the churches, and the same way, let's put that energy in. And if you see a friend or somebody who is not a friend, somebody who is not compliant, because sometimes people are not paying because their friends are not paying. So we need to also get people involved in the compliance process. Get them, don't just put the tax system away from them. I'm sure with time you'll talk more on this.
Definitely we should. As for the issue of tax compliance on the role of GRA and the role of citizens or the taxpayers, of course, I would hope every time you come, we brush on it. We brush on it to keep reminding Ghanaians or to keep throwing a word at the GRA on maybe, you know, what they should do to help us all so that we all comply. Voluntary over enforced. But right now, before you go, I want you to touch on the luxury vehicle tax. Let's just touch on it and then we'll go for a break and then we'll expand more on it the next time you come.
Okay, I think that the luxury vehicle tax, as you all know, has kind of come to stay. And from my perspective, from the angle of wealth taxation, because that's the purpose. It's a wealth taxation and also falls under the broader sin taxes. If I can quote the Deputy Minister for Finance when they implement, what he said was, this will generate revenue and in addition protect our environment. So from these two angles, we're looking at revenue generation in terms of wealth taxation and then environmental taxation. Now here is the challenge. We introduced a tax that was on 19th July, Thursday, in the mid-year budget. We made a proposal that's going to happen. 28th of July, that was 9 days, Parliament passed it. 1st of August, fully operational. Where is the time to educate taxpayers? So we need to go back to the drawing board, have a public consultation, educate Ghanaians properly on what the purpose of the tax and what the intentions are. And finally, every tax...
I don't want us to give viewers too much. So just a taste.
Of taste for today.
Taste for today.
Every tax has a name.
Your final words.
Every tax has a name.
Yeah.
Income tax is on income. Corporate tax is on corporate income.
Ah.
VAT is on value added. Why do we have luxury tax when in effect you are not taxing luxury vehicles?
Interesting. I'll leave you on that point, Dr. Alex Ampabing. Now, a few messages came through. I'll just read just two of them because we don't have time. Tax for the informal sector. Ghana. This is coming from Nanama Afrakuma. And there's also another message from Afo Gilbert Francis. He said, love this young doctor. Ghana has great minds. Shine, Dr. Ampabing. We are solidly behind you. So he is our main tax guy. He's a fiscal policy specialist with Oxfam. So his name is Dr. Alex Ampabing. We have more coming up on the show. We have the entertainment segment. So don't go anywhere. More for you. Stay tuned.